Welcome, Fedi Friends, to episode 18 of Fireside Fedi. I'm your host, Ozone. Fireside Fedi is a show about folks within the Fediverse. If you're seeing this, you are part of the Fediverse. With me today is Nik Clayton. Nik is a principled software engineer. I love this part, a gentleman programmer, and is a current Pachli steward. Nik also posts some delicious looking food, and I definitely want to know about that. So, Nik, welcome so much. And how can we address you? What's the best way to address
you? Thank you very much. Just Nik is absolutely fine. I don't know if the folks on the screen can see the collection of arcade banners behind you, but I've always, since I was probably about 7 or 8, ended up spelling it just with N-I-K, just because that's all you could fit on those old-time high school tables.
That's why you go by Nik.
Literally at the top, and I just ended up spelling it like that.
That's great. I love that. I was like, because I kept looking at that. I was like, that's a very unique way to spell a name. But I never thought of that. Yeah, I love my arcade marquees. I want to get more someday. And those have seen actual cabinets. Like when I bought those, my wife was like, well, why don't you get new ones? I was like, because they don't have history.
Yeah,
why would I want new ones? I don't know where they've been. I don't care, but like they got the battle scars, right?
Yeah. Somebody's put their nickels on those, or like stubbed out their cigarettes on those, or sort of
right,
thumped them in frustration.
Yeah, and those might be older than me for all I know.
Yeah,
that's awesome. That's cool. I never thought about that. That's awesome. That's really interesting to hear. I like that a lot. So arcades were a big part of your life growing up.
Yeah. And then I realized after my sort of first home computer, so growing up in the UK, you were either a Commodore household or a Spectrum household, typically. And so we ended up being a sort of a Commodore household. And I remember getting the first home computer there and probably playing games on it for about 6 months or so. And then certainly at that time, all of these home computers came with programming manuals. And I remember opening that up one day and having that sort of realization of, oh, wait a second, like you can just type stuff in and things will appear on the screen and you can sort of make it make sounds or whatever. And that was my hook into programming at that point, and then never really looked back.
I love that. I mean, I had something similar, but we had a Tandy TRS-80, and it was the same way as I started playing video games off of audio cassette tape.
Yeah.
And then like that drove me into playing with computers. But what was your parents' goal? Was it just for entertainment, or was it like, we need to get a computer because everyone else is? And Nik, who we left off the C, we call NIK. Was that their hope that gets you into that, or was that a nice side effect?
I think it was probably more of a nice side effect. So my father at that point was working for ICL, which is sort of the UK version of IBM, kind of.
Oh.
And so was working with sort of computers day to day. But then coming back home one weekend with a Commodore VIC-20 at the time, so like 3.5K of RAM.
Never need more than that.
Everything loaded from tape or from these very chunky cartridges that you would plug in. And yeah, I just sort of went from there. And I think of my sort of cohort of friends growing up at the time, I think I was probably the only one that was then also into programming as a sort of creative thing to do. A lot of them otherwise would be using like sort of paint software on them, or going on to like sort of a decade later, things like the Amiga, and using software like Lightwave, 3D rendering and stuff like that. But that side of things never really appealed to me. But programming is that thing that I suspect for people who are creative in other media scratches that same sort of itch at the back of your head of, if I don't do something creative in this medium that I understand some amount of time per week, then that itch is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and become more and more distracting until you get that out of your head and onto a canvas or a book that you're writing or something that you're composing or whatever. And in my case, it's code on the screen and apps on your phone, or web applications or whatever.
If I don't know if it was the same for you, but for me, it was magical, right? How it did all of this stuff, and then there was this book that could teach you how to do all of that stuff too.
Yeah.
But wow, was it like I spent an entire weekend one time just printing out stuff, and the Tandy TRS-80, it had no long-term storage. So as soon as I turned it off to go back to my mother's house, like it was gone, and it was like, oh, God, it's painful.
You'd have all of the sort of the computer magazines at the time with the typing listings and things, and then inevitably you would make a mistake typing it in. But that then also was a good way to build up some debugging skills, because you had to try and figure out why wasn't it working.
See, I miss that. I never had that. And before anyone tells me that the Tandy TRS-80 did have long-term storage, we had this like, it was just a keyboard thing, and then you plugged it into a regular TV via coax. I think it was coax. I don't remember. So my dad could actually take it with him when he went out of town. But yeah, those. When I found out about those magazines, I don't know, like 10, 15 years ago, I was like, that had to be an amazing time, just seeing all this code in front of you. And then you could create that and all of that free code that they give. And then, came what, 80s and 90s, and then code started getting locked down. It's like, no, we could make them pay for this.
Yeah.
And I feel like it really stifled creativity like that. And with the advent of the internet, though, we've kind of clawed that back, right? Because now we have GitHub and open source repositories and all things to allow that kind of creativity to go. But yeah, that was a time like, and I'm in the US. I was never in the UK. I never had a Commodore. But it seemed to me like there was a big push by the United Kingdom to teach a lot of the people in the UK how to do computers, right? So there was, because I think you guys had Commodores in school at that.
So we had Commodore would have been a thing in schools. There was another Commodore brand, PET, that showed up in schools quite a lot. And then the BBC got involved with what at the time was Acorn Computers,
right?
To then produce the BBC Micro. And there was like a whole television series around this, and these were very popular in schools as well.
And folks today, oh yeah, that's right. There was the whole the TV show, right? You could do something with code on that, couldn't you?
Yes, I'm vaguely blanking on that. I want to say the show was called something like Micro Live, I think.
Yeah.
But then out of Acorn, then came like what we would now today just refer to as ARM.
Yep.
And they're like, you trace the lineage back there, and the chips in your phones and the chips in like sort of high-end servers or desktops or whatever. Today it's either typically like Intel or ARM. And it's like a British company done good and came out of all of that back in the 1980s.
That's awesome. So that's how you started. How did you continue going with that? Did you go to school? Did you just have a passion and you just coded all the time? Did you go off? Like, how did you get to where you're at today?
Okay, sort of the Cliff Notes version, I guess. So it became very apparent very quickly, I think, for me, that computer science in some form and software engineering, programming was a thing that I would end up doing and trying to turn into a career, not knowing at that point that was going to be a thing. So in the UK, I sort of went through the fairly traditional school, college, and university route, which I think in the US would be like school, high school, and university, I think. And then took a slight swerve because the university that I went to at the time was quite unusual in that typically in the UK, you would have a 3-year degree, and they did a 4-year degree, but essentially the same content, but in the first 3 years, you would do 3 6-month internships throughout those 3 years. And your internship is essentially sort of a long job interview.
Yeah.
And the company that I was interning with in the third year, I'd been there about a week, and they offered me a job. I went, okay, this is interesting. It feels like the goal obviously was to get out of university, graduate, and then end up with a job. So
You short-circuited.
Achieve that a little bit early.
Yeah.
So I sort of went back to the university and said, this has happened. Can I like defer my degree for a year or 2 years or whatever, and come back? And they said, yes, you can. I think it was defer it for up to 2 years, and come back and retain the course credits that you previously had, and just carry on from where you left off. So I thought, okay, well that's not much risk.
Yes.
So I sort of went and did that. And then, to my mother's eternal chagrin, I have not yet returned and actually graduated. Because at that point, this was the early 90s in the UK. The internet was just starting to become a thing in the broader consciousness. So the first consumer dial-up ISPs were a thing. You were starting in a few places to see like sort of organizations realizing, oh, we need to have a website. And the company that I was working for had started as a traditional design company, had veered into CD-ROM design for a bit when that was the thing. And then one of the directors, who was very forward-thinking, had looked at this internet thing and had thought, this is going to be big. We need to be getting into this. And they'd hired me as their first like general we need somebody who knows something about the internet. And so I was working with them for a couple of years, designing websites for all sorts of companies, not the actual graphic design, because they had incredibly talented graphic designers for that, but what today we would probably call the information architecture for it, and all of the back-end programming. And then I was also the guy that was going into the meetings with the clients to answer like any technical questions that they might throw at us. So like there I was in my sort of early 20s and going into meetings in London with companies like Sony Europe and stuff like that, and kind of blagging it, but also actually like knowing the stuff and being able to have like sort of technical conversations and jump
with
in
Sony. Hang on, but because you blitz through that, you're just like, yeah, I just did websites, for Sony. Like that's big.
I remember like the first meetings where they had it was prototype PS2s at that point.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, we've got this new game that we think is going to be really big. I think it was PS2, and it was seeing Crash Bandicoot for the first time. I think that was PS2. But yeah, and then that was like an insane time because like your early 20s, you can do anything. So I was working like 20-hour days and not really realizing what burnout was or whatever. But after about 2.5 years of that, that all sort of got a bit much. And what I've been doing at university as well, that was my first forays into open source too. So one of the projects that I'd worked on sort of on the side at university had been to solve a problem that the student radio had, which is the university that I was at was split across 4 different campuses, and the student radio didn't have a license to broadcast in the traditional sense. So they could only do induction broadcasting to one of the campuses. And so basically you're getting radio waves coming through your radiator or whatever in your hall of residence that can perhaps go 10 feet because they didn't have like the broader broadcasting license.
Yeah.
And I realized that the university had fitted all the student dorms with internet connections. And so I had this idea, well, we could put a computer in the student radio station because I would are friends with people that were broadcasting there, digitize the output, and then broadcast it across the campus network. And so through that, I then discovered technologies like internet multicasting, because I went and talked to the people responsible for running the student network, or the computer network at the university, who told me in no uncertain terms, no, like broadcasting this is not what you're going to do. Like you need to read up on this thing called multicast. So I did that. We got some sponsorship from a computer company in the UK for the hardware to go in the radio station and things like that. And through that got me involved with the FreeBSD operating system, because at the time, your choices really were either FreeBSD or Linux as free Unix-like operating systems on PCs. NetBSD was a thing as well at the time, but I think probably less well known. And of those two at that point in time, FreeBSD's networking stack supported multicast and Linux didn't. So I went with FreeBSD, similar to the Sonos systems that I already used and got to be familiar with, that were part of the campus computer rooms. And took that knowledge with me when I was like sort of building websites. All of that stuff was being hosted on FreeBSD servers, different places around the world. Going to BSD conferences, going to things like the Usenix conferences, which are like fantastic ways to network as well, and really help that world feel sort of more connected. And obviously, like, it's great being able to put actual faces to names, and when you've only been emailing people backwards and forwards or whatever.
Yeah.
And then through that, many years later, one of the people that I'd worked with very closely on some of the FreeBSD stuff had been hired by Google, and I didn't know that at that point. But at this time, what Google was doing when they hired you was they were metaphorically turning you upside down, giving you a damn good shaking, and saying, look, for the love of God, do you know anybody else that we might want to hire? And so this friend of mine in the US had, without telling me, he'd given them my name and contact details. And so one evening in 2006, I got a phone call out of the blue from a guy who identified himself as a Google recruiter. And asked, was I interested in interviewing this role? And I thought about this for about a second and a half. I was like, oh, yes, I would. Thank you very much. That would be great. I'm thinking, like, there's no way they're going to hire me. And at that point as well, Google certainly had a very strong reputation for, like, we only hire university graduates. So I remember telling them through the entirety of the interview process, like, you remember, like, I've told you multiple times, I didn't graduate. I don't want to get through the end of this process only to be told, oh, you did really well, but we only hire graduates. Sorry. And so I came out to Switzerland for interviews, because at that point the roles, they didn't have SRE roles in London. So you had the choice of either Switzerland or Dublin. And I like to ski, so Switzerland was a good choice. Came out here for interviews. Had the interviews, I remember, on a Friday, stayed in Switzerland over the weekend to see if you could survive here with terrible German. And it turns out you can. Went back thinking, well, that was like great. I really enjoyed it. Met some fantastic people in the interviews, like learned some stuff in the interviews, which was great. But thinking there's no way they're going to hire me. And then I got back on the Sunday night and I had a job offer on the Tuesday. And then it was about 4 months of sorting out an international move and leaving my previous job and stuff like that before coming out here. And then that was like sort of Google for 12 years, I think.
Something wow.
So right, 2007 to 2018. Oh yeah, okay, no, so 11 years. And then some bits of freelancing with other companies since then. And then now I'm sort of fortunate enough to sort of find myself in a position where, through some very lucky circumstances, I don't need to be paid for most of the work that I do now. So I found myself being able to volunteer with different organizations. So there's like organizations here, primarily those that work with people in Switzerland who've got a refugee status for one reason or another. So volunteering with those, and then that also gives me free time to do that sort of the creative bit that I enjoy, which is the programming and getting those ideas out on screen and in other people's hands to get feedback from.
See, this is why I love talking to people right here, because Nick and I had like an initial discussion, and I don't think you ever mentioned Google, and
Right.
or really any of this. We basically talked about Pachli, and then I have this whole list of questions, and that's why I've told people it's organic. I just want to have a conversation, and this is great. And for those that don't know, there used to be a time where Google was seen as kind of like a really good innovator and leader of a free and open internet. They had a logo that said "Do no evil." That's since gone by the wayside, and now pretty much any new project gets canned 6-9 months or something like that after release. But that's fascinating. Have you ever, so getting a little bit back on to Fediverse stuff, did you ever do social media before this? Did you partake in what was it, Google Plus or whatever?
Yes, and was actually fairly closely involved with that, because for the first, I think, probably 4 years at Google, I was part of the SRE team. So SRE, Site Reliability Engineering.
Okay. Yep.
It's an engineering role, but you're focused more on making sure that the systems work rather than the features that those systems are providing to users. So.
Right.
And the team that I was on, ever since I had started at Google, was the team for Orkut, which was one of Google's social networks that, for reasons that I don't fully understand, had become massive in both Brazil and India.
Hmm.
And it was in this very weird position, I think, within Google, where you had millions upon millions of users, huge amounts of traffic. And for all the things that were good about Google at that point in time, one of the things I think that was quite bad was a sort of very US parochial nature or viewpoint about sort of the rest of the internet. So the fact that you had all of these users off in Brazil or India, like dwarfing in some cases the number of users of other products, certainly in terms of requests per second and the amount of traffic. I remember being on call for systems that were doing millions of requests per second. And like that today for large scale internet services is not necessarily a big number, but back in 2007, that's still a big number. But
yeah,
within Google, you were still having to fight for the resources to serve all of the stuff, get data centers built out in Brazil, for example, so that people weren't dealing with sort of big latency issues and things like that. And so that was probably my first very big social media experience. I had a little bit of time on Facebook, but killed that account probably 14 or 15 years ago now. Good and man. Sort of never looked back. And then I think probably in around when COVID first hit, and then there started being sort of quite a lot of good information being shared on Twitter. And so I was sort of using Twitter quite a bit for that. And then obviously everything went very, very bad there. And in 2022, I think it was when I was looking for something else. And that's when I'd first heard about Mastodon. So I was part of that wave that came over in late 2022.
That's amazing, though, because as someone that's always been into open source, I've always tried to look for open networks. I've never liked the idea of a centralized social media in that anyone can do anything they want behind the scenes with your data. And we're starting to find out some of the egregious and heinous things that they've done, and it could be bought out by a billionaire for whatever their purpose is. But to get on that, because we all have enough to say about that, so you have an incredibly unique history around this, which is very well suited to mentor new people trying to come into this. You've seen the backside of Google, right? You've seen how these things work. And as much as technical people like to fiddle with the tech stuff, this is a social network. Fediverse, all of it is a social network. So how do you see any opportunities to learn from Google or Twitter or Facebook to help the Fediverse grow beyond limitations that they've had, or do you have any thoughts for how to prevent similar issues that they've hit? I mean, obviously you have Pachli, right? But going further than that, do you have anything?
I think there's certainly a number of challenges that the Fediverse, I think, needs to solve around making the decentralized nature of things more accessible to users. Probably, I think, just the point where they don't need to care about it. I think that's like, I don't think about how the water gets into my apartment. I just turn a tap and water appears. I don't have to think about, oh, well, I need to use this tap if I want like this water from this particular brand, or maybe I prefer this water supplier over here. There's just water is there. Same with email is probably a good example here as well. Like, people might choose their email address or their email provider based on their ISP or whatever, or Gmail or Hotmail or Outlook.com or whatever, but they do all interoperate, and it kind of fades into the background. I don't have to worry too much now about whether or not my email is going to be received. Certainly that didn't used to be the case back in the late 90s, when spam was first sort of kicking off, and that was something else that I was doing. So I spent almost 5 years working for Citigroup in their inbound, outbound email systems, part of the team responsible for those, and being primarily responsible for Citigroup's inbound anti-spam systems. So when I see a lot of the discussions that are happening now around dealing with spam on the Fediverse, a lot of that looks like, well, people are just repeating discussions that were happening back in like 1998, and trying approaches that we tried in the late 90s and saw fail. I see this sometimes. I was going back to your point about the sort of broader social network side of things. One of the things that Google tried to do, because they were obviously very worried about the dominance of Facebook in the 2000s, was there was a sort of industry consortium called Open Social. And the idea was that this was going to be technologies that different social networks could use to interoperate, right? And so you could post something on one social network and we would call it now federate to a different social network. You could be on Orbit and post something and it would show up for people who were following you on MySpace, for example. The elephant in the room there was you had all of these small players willing to sign up to it. And at that point in this space, Google was still a small player despite the size of Orkut, because everybody was looking at this through the lens of what does the US need? And you had Facebook refusing to participate.
Of course, yeah.
Exactly. And I see that playing out a little bit today with people saying, oh, well, we should just go and we don't like the way that, say, the Mastodon software is doing something. So we will get a sort of consortium, in quotes, of other server developers together. And we're going to agree that, oh, actually, this bit of the spec should be interpreted in this particular way, or we're going to send data in this particular format or whatever. And when I see those sorts of well-meaning proposals, my first question to the proposer is, okay, sounds great. How are you going to get Mastodon GmbH, the German software company, to adopt this? Because if you don't have a coherent plan for how that's going to happen, then we're back to that XKCD comic that everybody knows that ends, now you have 16 standards.
Right.
And that side of things, I think, is definitely a challenge. People are obviously very focused on how do we ship these features? How do we ship these features quickly? Because I feel like there's a sense of feeling sort of Threads and Blue Sky breathing down their necks in terms of their growing market share and things like that as well. I certainly see this in how some of the development practices, or not so much development practices, I'd say almost design practices around how some of these features are designed and then deployed. So one of the things that I found quite surprising was some months back now, Mastodon shipped a feature where you can add metadata to your website with your social media Fediverse handle in it. And if somebody shares a link to your website, then in the preview card, there will be a link to your account.
Okay.
Right? So say if you're a journalist and you're sharing your content, then I can see the link and I can see, oh, this is posted by somebody I can follow. And I can go and click their profile and follow them and see what else they posted and stuff like that. That's great. But one of the questions that's not answered there is, suppose we've got a journalist and I follow you. I have blocked that journalist, and you post a link that has that journalist's byline on it.
Sure.
Okay? Because I follow you, that could show up in my timeline.
Right.
But I've blocked the journalist. Now, what should happen there? Should I still see it because I follow you?
Yeah.
Should I see it, but should the preview card be blocked because I blocked the journalist? Should I not see it at all?
Right.
And through conversations with the Mastodon developers, I discovered like questions like this just weren't even considered.
The edge cases.
The feature. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is at the heart of why social media is so darn difficult, right? Because of all of the edge cases. We are all unique individuals. I might want to see it, and you might say, no, I don't want to see it at all, ever. Don't even give me the option to.
Yeah.
And because we're two different people, I'm like, well, that's censorship then, right? To me, that's censorship. You should at least make the choice, not Mastodon making the choice or whatnot. Or you would say, don't shove this down my throat. And this is why this kind of thing is so difficult. And then even if you give someone the choice in the settings, every single option you add doesn't just add another layer of complexity. It could add exponential complexity. And that's, again, and I think that this is why in the Fediverse, we have to do it together though. Right? You can't, it seems like Mastodon is obviously the biggest player right now. And Eugen has been pretty open about, not being the next Google or Facebook, even the benevolent dictator. But it still takes everyone working together. But then everyone working together slows us down, which then we fear the competition, which is a decentralized, centralized network that is gaining traction. And that's interesting. Like, I haven't looked at any of that through that type of lens. I mean, I'm not going to Blue Sky. I've never been on social media up until the Fediverse. I had friends telling me to get on Facebook back when I was in college. I was like, I'll create an account. I'm never going to use it. And then I deleted it. And I tried out Google Plus, never did that. Twitter, I checked out a couple times, but that's gone. But I absolutely agree. Lowering the barrier to entry is how we get people on board, and making it seamless. Like I'm starting btfree.org, which is trying to be a way to talk to, say normal, not technical folks that just want to use it as a tool and not worry about the background. And then I've started telling people, like, if you and I disagree, don't care about what, you say a word and I'm like, that's not, to me, that's offensive. To you, it's not offensive. Like, there are some words in the UK, right, that in America, oh my goodness, you can't say that. Then at least you have the option to move somewhere. And I'll be more than happy to help set you up. But a lot of folks don't want to mess with that stuff. They right. and they're used to getting it for free. So how do we go from there? And I've actually been trying to think about stuff like that as well. I actually downloaded Packli, and I've been using Packli, and my only thought at this point is like, it would be interesting if Packli or any other client wasn't just a client, but it was a self-contained stack that could then go out to a relay, and the relay is always there. So you can pick up and drop off your messages as you fire up or shut down the app, similar to what email has, as you were mentioning, from the late 90s. But it is funny to hear you say that, because you and I lived through those days, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of the Fediverse folks weren't even born yet.
Yeah. Yes. I'm acutely aware that some of it could very definitely come across as a sort of old man yelling at cloud, like kids get off my lawn, all of that. And and I don't know how many people will believe me about this. It is more coming from a place of, it is quite sad to see so much wasted time spent reinventing or trying things that were tried, and that we discovered don't work, or perhaps do work, but also have these interesting failure modes that you need to be aware of. I came up again with there's the proposal work ongoing at the moment to properly support the idea of quote posting on Mastodon, which I think some other servers support as well. And like that again, and this may have changed because it's been a little while since I looked at the spec, but the last time I looked at it, that had the same problem, which is, say, I follow you, you decide to quote something posted by somebody else, and I have blocked that person. Mm-hmm. Now, do I still see your post? Do I see it but without the quote? And now maybe it looks weird because I can't see it, or how should that be presented? And those sorts of conversations should be happening before the code is written, because
I think,
the code is written, then people get into this. Oh well, I've written the code. The next thing I have to do is ship it, and anything that prevents me from doing that is now like, it's almost like it's denying the dopamine hit of getting the code out the door. We saw this at Google. So again, one of the things that I was doing there for the last 2 and a bit years before I left was I was on the team that was responsible for managing privacy incidents that could happen, right? So if there was an issue, it would get reported to the team, and we would triage it and treat it like a sort of a proper incident. And that meant also working with the teams that were doing reviews of designs before they went out the door and code before it was shipped as well. And it was oftentimes, certainly early on, a real struggle to get enough information out of the designs to be able to determine, oh no, wait a second, there's a privacy risk here, because if you do it this way, you are inadvertently using data that users provided in a way that they haven't consented to, or you're exposing it in a different place in a way that they haven't consented to, or whatever. And so you either need to rethink that approach, or if you can't, then we need to figure out how to get informed consent.
Well, and it's the classic Ian Malcolm quote of we were too busy trying to figure out if we could, we never stopped to think if we should, right? And again, there's never going to be a right answer for everyone. There's always going to be that case, and it's such a difficult thing. And I mean, every single time one stack implements something and something else doesn't, you fracture the system. And we've seen this in open source, especially with Linux. We've seen these wars. They weren't, but they're massive conversations around how are we going to go. The biggest, the last biggest one I thought of was systemd, right? And there was years, literally years of having that conversation until finally, the big dog in the room, Debian, basically said, we're going this way. And while there are still those fringe ones out there, it's like, okay, well, Debian's doing this. We're built on Debian. We're just going to do it, right? No, and that's incredibly interesting. But so you have, you directly, I believe it is yours. You call yourself the steward of Pachli.
Yeah.
So let's talk about why you call yourself like the steward of Pachli, where the name comes from. Like, how did you even get started with Pachli?
So Pachli comes out of some work that I had started in probably late 2022, where so I signed up for a Mastodon account, as it seemed everybody was doing at that point. Started with the official Mastodon Android client, and very quickly bounced off that. Just not for any sort of technical reason, just for whatever reason, the UI of that doesn't fit with my aesthetic. Tried a few others, landed on Tusky, which was also very popular at the time. That was, in look and feel, that felt quite similar to the open source Twitter client that I had previously been using. And so that also sort of fit into my existing habits, if you like. And not long after using it, realizing it worked for me from a UX perspective, but there were a lot of niggles, sometimes like outright bugs or UX weirdness that I was looking at. And of course, with my software engineering hat on and open source experience hat and whatever, thinking, okay, right, well, this is an open source project. Of course, I can just go and fix this, fix these, and also it's then going to be a learning opportunity as well. So years before, I had worked on Android app development. I had taken over responsibility for an existing open source Android music client. It was a controller for a series of Logitech media players. And I then handed responsibility for that off to somebody else as well when sort of real life became too busy. So I had a bit of a background in Android development as well. But things sort of moved on a lot as well. So I was looking at this and going, well, this is going to be a good opportunity to learn as well. My sort of into the project was the way that I sort of will often get started with larger projects is I'd identified a number of things that could very easily go into the frequently asked questions list. And so like I sent a PR that updated the FAQ and started talking to people involved in the project, and then started fixing either things that I had discovered and were personally annoying to me or bugs, or things that other people had reported. So like I remember there was an issue where if you were viewing an image and you were viewing it full screen and you could do the whole like pinch zoom to zoom into it, and sometimes you would do that and then the image would kind of stick on the screen and you could no longer like scroll around it and stuff.
Okay.
And like that bit me repeatedly. And it's one of those things where you just look at it and you go, I've got to fix this. Like it's just like this itch that you have to scratch to do that. And then was doing that through most of 2023. For reasons that are quite long and involved to go into here, but are all written up on my website if people actually care. I parted ways with the Tusky project in around, I think it was August 23, with, in my mind, a fairly clear idea of things that I thought were project failings. Let's call them project failings, not individual failings, right? Because I think that's an important distinction to make, right?
Sure.
And so I'm then sort of looking around and thinking, all right, well, I've talked at that point fairly publicly about what I thought some of these failings were. And then it's kind of, well, if you're going to talk the talk, you have to be prepared to walk the walk about this.
Yes.
Well. And I had like some specific ideas around what it meant to run an open source project where like you're deliberately trying to attract more users. It's not just about like scratching your personal itch, where the responsibilities that you have as a project, if you're going to start soliciting money for the project and how you're going to explain how you're going to spend that money, and ways to give back to the community as well, right? So ideas around things like sort of project governance and stuff will also front of my mind. So I spent a couple of months kicking around some ideas, trying to decide, okay, do I actually want to sort of go in on this? Decided I did because I was still using, at that point, like Tusky on a daily basis. And so I think, all right, okay, there's all these problems like I still want to fix. To be super clear, in Packli now, my laundry list of things that I still want to fix is probably even longer, because as I do more work with it and I look at more of the code and sort of end up scratching my head again in terms of why is this like this? And again, to be super clear, like this is not throwing shade on any of the Tusky developers, right? That code base started back in, I think, 2018. A lot of best practices have been developed since then, and like ways of structuring the code and thinking about data flows and stuff like that, right? So like that's absolutely not what it is. And I still see all of that when I'm sort of looking through the code for Packli now. So then thought, okay, right, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to want to start a project. The hardest part of which was probably coming up with the name. Thinking about governance needs to be front of mind. Thinking about and being explicit about any sort of funding for it needs to be front of mind as well, because I think this is like a failure mode of a lot of open source projects. I don't want to sort of talk about this as like sort of it's a sliding scale, because that implies like some level of improvement or advancement or whatever. But I do think like a solo dev project where it's very clear that like any donations are going to just fund that developer or buy them coffee or whatever, like absolutely fine. Bigger projects, corporate sponsorship, all of that money coming in, like they've got the processes, or they should have the processes for that as well. But it's where is that transition point between a solo developer who's like happily just like sort of hacking away on it on their own versus trying to or wanting to create something bigger. And if you want to do that, it's much better to have the foundations for that in place as soon as possible. So, so at the moment, for example, Pachli, like the project doesn't formally accept any donations directly because I'm working with the Nivenly Foundation to put in place policies for both expenses and grants that will then talk about actually how that money will be spent. Because I feel like if you are going to solicit money from people, you should be able to tell them how that money is going to be spent.
Right.
And like that was like one of the founding ideas for Packli. So like a concrete example of what I want to do at some point in the next 12 months is host an intern in the project for 3 to 6 months to work on some very specific ideas that I've got that I don't have time to do. But that would be a paid project. There would be deliverables associated with it. I would need to be able to commit a certain amount of time per week to mentoring and reviewing code and things like that. Like, so you can't just go into that sort of half-cocked. There needs to be thought and work that goes into that as well. And that's where things like getting Packli under the umbrella of the Nivenly Foundation and their cooperative model was very important. Because again, I could either have done that myself and set up an association here, but again, that is time that is taking me away from other things that I want to do.
Right.
And I don't think like people say this enough either. That's very much not one of my areas of expertise. And like it's a common, right? It's a common failure mode for people to then go, oh, okay, right. Like especially like old white guy. Oh well, how hard can this be? Right? I must be able to go and do this as well. But I've got skills in this area. They must be transferable, right? And of course, that's not the case.
No, and I've come to realize that too. Like I used to, again, as a techie person, I go out and about, and like they have the little kiosk units at restaurants and things that, and I look at it from that IT point of view, and I never realized I looked at it from that IT point of view of like, wow, the interface on this thing is really crap. Why would they ever buy this? And then as someone starting a business, it's like, yeah, I've got an accountant because I realized how stressful it is to try to figure out all of that myself. And you can eventually get there. But like what would take me 2 weeks takes her an hour because she's used to it, right? So you outsource those highly technical things that you are not familiar with so that you can do what you are best at. And that's what Nivenly is for you. That's interesting. Yeah, we'll have to talk
so
about that, definitely.
That's sort of where that came from, which then also is why I try and sort of style this as like I'm the current steward of the project. Success would be at some point in the future being able to hand that off to somebody else to steward for a period of time, and then they can hand that off to somebody else as well, right? This whole like sort of big dictator for life like type thing, like both doesn't apply, and like that's also what leads to burnout as well. Right? And I've been quite fortunate in my career of not having to go through that, but I have seen the impact that has had on other colleagues. And being able to look at that as kind of a cautionary tale and go, oh, okay, that's what that looks like. Stay well away from that particular edge.
And I think that's what a lot of the open source community that has survived. Again, I think Debian is an excellent example of this. That was started by I think one person or a couple people or something. Same thing, Red Hat, but Red Hat is a giant corporate entity at this point. They go through and they have an election board, and not only I think does it transcend you, which you're going to get sick eventually, right? Even if it's just a cold or something, you're down for a week, and you're like, oh my God, nothing's been done for a week. You need more than one person managing these things. But again, for the betterment, not even of the project, but for the betterment of all of us, it can't linchpin on one person. And not only that, in my point of view, should it not beholden to just you, but by bringing in other people, even full changes of leadership, you get completely different views that you could never have imagined to take the project. And sometimes it doesn't end up well, but hey, you tried. And then other times it explodes and goes in routes. Blender in my chat was saying earlier, forks are a good thing. And I agree to an extent that forks are a good thing in that they can help bring massive innovation. And trying different people brings massive innovation, again, because we look at it from different points. But also you can't have someone, so Nick, if you like step down and someone comes in, it's like, yeah, I'm going to completely rewrite Pachli and assembly. It's like, okay, yeah, you can do that, but that's not like, we're at a different stage of where we want to be right now. Like that's not the best either. So I think that's massively valuable, and being under a foundation like that, as you said, you're making sure that all of the hard work you put into it continues to move forward, even if it's not just in Pachli, it's the tendrils of you, your digital ghost, right, lives on through someone else. And I love that.
I think some of it as well is also just wanting to demonstrate that this is doable in this way. And of course, the sort of kind of, okay, no pun intended, but the elephant in the room there are kind of, I might be wrong about that, right? We might be having a similar conversation in 5 years' time, and it turns out in those 5 years, I'm still the largest code contributor, and there've been very few other like code contributions. Okay, in which case, that approach either didn't work. It may also be the case that and I do wonder about this, just that the pool of interested open source developers to draw from might just be very, very small. So the Tusky project, when I was involved there, like I don't know what the numbers are now, but had I think about 120,000 users. And the Mastodon Android app, I think, has about 300,000, something like that, I think. And again, those numbers are about 2 years out of date. But with that many users, in terms of code contributions, you had maybe like 4 or 5 people regularly contributing code.
Right, yeah.
So your user to contributor code, let me be clear, code contributor ratio is still very, very low. And just to clarify that, obviously there are other excellent ways to contribute. One of the things that I'm fortunate to have is quite early on, a number of people stepped up and keep the user interface translated into many languages.
Right.
So that's an important thing, and it's the sort of thing, again, as an example of things that I think are important for these sorts of projects to do, is like every release credits everybody that contributed what they did. I work hard to try and credit not just the people that fixed bugs or did translation work or whatever, but also the people that reported the bugs in the first place, because that is a very valuable way of contributing. I fully understand, like some people.
Well, and it doesn't even have to be a bug, right? It could be a suggestion, an idea. Yeah. I have Pachli on my phone, and it is fast. I have some thoughts and suggestions on it that I'm probably going to be posting or talking about to you privately later. But I've been sitting on PyFed because I talked to Rimu a while ago, and it's like I view it through a little bit differently. You built Pachli, you used Pachli since the day one. You've seen it evolve, so it makes perfect sense to you, right? And Rimu's the same way, because again, he builds it. He knows his brain works in the same way. Mine doesn't. And I've looked at some of these things and I'm like, hey, this would be a bit better if this was moved. Literally, like when I was creating a post, there was a button that says create post. And I clicked on that button and it comes up with a post, but then it still says create post. And I'm like, so I press here to create my post. And then it's like, oh no, it's a new post. And it's just asking questions, even giving suggestions, talking about your point of view of things are still massively valuable as well. No one here needs to be a coder. Pachli needs a community of all kinds of people, right? And every single person that interacts like that is valuable and should feel valued.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would say probably 50% of the new feature development is based on suggestions from other people. And probably 50% of it is me using it and getting frustrated because it doesn't work the way that I want it to. Or like, so there's a feature that's in Pachli Current, which is kind of the beta version, and will be in the next release at the end of this month, where previously, if you wanted to add a description to an image or a video or an audio file that you would attach to a post, you would have to know you had to click on the attachment, and then a menu would pop up, and then you had to tap the menu entry that said edit caption, and then you would get this sort of quite small window in which to actually sort of put the caption, and then you had to close that dialog box and so on. Now, as soon as you attach a post, within the rest of the UI for writing your post includes an area for you to type the description directly. So it saves you multiple tabs. It throws the fact that it's good practice to write a description front and center.
Yes.
As well. And like, I have no way of knowing if this is the case, but my hope is that things like that will drive small changes in behavior. People will find it like that a little bit easier to add these captions. That's something that I'd struggle with on almost probably weekly basis in terms of trying to make decisions about some of these new features, UX changes, and things like that.
When it comes, literally, what you're talking about is this accessibility, making it easier to allow accessibility, even, right? And that's
certainly part of it. And I've been very fortunate where there are a number of people who use Pachli who have different levels of accessibility needs, who have been a fountain of like sort of suggestions and things that could be made easier. Because that is a thing that I'm in the very fortunate position I do not need to use those particular assistive aids. And so those aren't the types of things in the user experience that are bugging me on a day-to-day basis. So having the feedback from people who do actually use it is super helpful.
Yeah.
But I mean, one of the challenges is there is very little telemetry from Pachli. The reason why I say very little and not none is because if you've installed Pachli from the Google Play Store, then one of the things I think that Google does, and I have no control over this, is if Pachli crashes, Google provides telemetry about that crash. Like, here's the line of code that crashed. Doesn't tell you who the user was, doesn't tell you their account, but it lets you bucket it by things like device and Android version. Right. So there's very little bit of data there. But I don't have any information on things like how many people install Pachli and within the first week go and change one of the preference defaults from off to on.
That's a good point.
If I had that information, and I discovered 90% of people turn this preference from off to on, I would probably use that information to go and change the default for new users to give them a better experience. But I don't have that information. And when I try and think about what it would take to add that on a technical side, it's very, very easy. On a social side, I think the number of people that would look at that and go, oh, like any form of telemetry even if it is completely anonymized, is just
bad. We've been so abused by it. Right now it's come to, oh, well, we've made it better. We tell you what people are doing. It's like, no, can you access my storage?
Yeah.
Yes, you need to download pictures, sure. But then we don't realize it's looking at every single file name out there. And it's like, oh, well, you have pictures of kids. It's like, yeah, they're my kids.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's the laws and the transparency has not caught up, and it is very black and white in a lot of people's minds. There is massively good, massively useful, massively privacy respecting telemetry. But right now, as a society, it seems like we're kind of sick of that because we've been so abused by it.
Yeah, for sure. And so at the moment, and probably for the foreseeable future, Pachli doesn't have that sort of thing exactly for those sorts of concerns. But it does also then mean that ultimately a lot of the look and feel and the behavior is a sort of a question of taste. And right now, the taste that it appeals to is me. Because I would also not end up working on a project that I didn't want to end up using every day.
Have you thought about using like Mastodon's polling features to poll people about how to prioritize features or which options to switch on and off or anything like that?
A little bit.
I know that's easy. Easier said than done.
And sometimes, for example, when I'm working on a new feature, so things like this feature that puts the media captioning front and center, I posted some screenshots of that early on in the development to get feedback from people about what they thought. My concerns with using like Mastodon's polling feature is it ends up kind of being self-selecting just to the people that reply to polls. And there's a little bit of the sort of, I suspect it was a Henry Ford quote, which is maybe a bit unfortunate, but something like, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have replied with a faster horse and not actually like a car.
Right.
So just asking people, do you change the default behavior for confirming before you boost a post, for example, which I always do, because I find it's like, for me, slightly too easy to press the button, and now I've inadvertently boosted something I didn't want to. And with my prior experience working in privacy, I then look at that as, well, that is potentially like a trust and safety issue, because the user has now publicized something they may not have intended to do.
Well, and it's interesting because we've already talked more about some, like in this, the last minute we've had this conversation, we've probably talked more about this than some people ever give it a thought. Like, no, turn it off. I want to boost aggressively. I don't care.
Yeah.
But that is the kind of, and that is slow and paced and, well thought out. And again, in the software development side, it's like, just make a choice and blaze on past it and we'll worry about it later. And later never comes.
Yeah. One of the things I'm considering doing, actually, I guess it's not so much a case of considering doing it, like I want to do it. It's a case of scheduling the work around everything else that has to happen. But it's an idea of a better onboarding flow after you've logged in for the first time. And it would ask you a few questions around, like, are you somebody who likes to post publicly? Like, do you want to go loud, or do you prefer to be quiet?
No, that's great.
That would preset some of these settings around confirmations and what is your preferred visibility when you post.
With something like that, have you thought about? Because I know Fedi tips, they keep track of like groups of people, essentially like a pack of, these are really good peer tubers, or, these folks are interested in science. And then if you select like, hey, I'm interested in science, then you can pull in what Fedi tips has. It's like, these might be people who are interested in following. Like that kind of onboarding is
starter pack idea.
Yeah. The starter pack.
There's a couple of projects that are sort of working on that. I've even got my own ideas, which at some point I should write up and publicize, around like a really simple way to do this that wouldn't require any server changes and privacy preserving and so on. But yeah, like stuff like that, going back to what you were talking about earlier in terms of things that will make it easier for people to adopt the Fediverse, I think are important.
And again,
I was going to give another example.
This is all open source too. So I like Pachli, but even if you don't like Pachli, but you like, something of it, Nik is giving the code, open source. You can take it yourself and use it your way, or, all these ideas. I think a lot of us in the Fediverse want to give freely, but you need to hear responses. You need to hear, thoughts. What could be totally normal for you and I, you talk about India, like could be a massive faux pas in India, and we'd have no idea.
Yep.
So please give feedback. Anyone that's using Pachli that's listening to this, please go, even if it's positive, even if it's just like, hey, I love Pachli. Great. People love to hear that. I've taken the habit of when you go out to a restaurant, it's like, hey, the food and the service was really good. And I asked for a manager, and then the server like freaks out. It's like, is everything okay? It's like, yeah, no, you were great. That's why I wanted to tell a manager. Like, we need to get back to that of complimenting others and opening those lines of communication, and continuing on. But sorry, I
yeah. So there was another example that popped into my mind and has now gone completely around that topic. It will probably pop in like 5 minutes after we've finished.
Right, after we're done. Yeah,
I think. But yeah, I think that actually was. Oh yeah, no, I remember what it was. So just sort of looping back to some of the ideas around the genesis of the project and things that I think it is important for a well-run open source project to do is things like be able to release very regularly, so that the people that are contributing know when their contributions are going to get into the hands of other users. Right. I think there's a lot of projects out there that release on an ad hoc schedule. Months might go between releases, and then from my perspective as a potential contributor to a project like that, I look at that and go, well, my PR might remain languishing for weeks or months, and then it's more months before anybody actually gets to use it. So my incentive to contribute has gone down. It's why Pachli releases on a monthly schedule every month, so that somebody who is contributing a translation, for example, they know that their work is going to be in the hands of other users soon, and they can rely on that.
That's awesome. That's great. I love that.
Even simple things like, and I'm sure when I say this, people will be able to sort of dig out instances of where I failed to do it. But I try and make sure that, for example, like every bug report is like the first thing you say to somebody like, when they report a bug is like, so you apologize because they've encountered that bug because they were trying to do something,
right?
And the software has got in the way. And I saw this a lot with, I think last year, around the middle of last year, I think was when there was the last like sort of big flare up of people complaining that Mastodon was not providing enough support and controls for people who were being harassed online.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw a lot of the conversation around that. And one of the things I observed was a lot of people talking to people who were describing how they had been harassed, the types of harassment that they had seen, the sorts of controls that might be put in place to deal with that. And the responses were, a lot of them very technical in terms of, oh, well, we would need to do this to the software, or the federated model just doesn't make that possible, or whatever. Now, all of that might be true, but also it's failing to hear like sort of a key part of what this person's telling you, which is like, I have just had a bad experience using your software.
Right.
And like it's basic good manners apart from anything else.
Well, it's human. You want to connect to the person on a personal level, and then after we do that, then let's worry about going into it. Like, I mean, in anyone that's done therapy, like I have a therapist I talk to weekly, and it's a lot about how you feel first. We are very emotional beings, so let's address that. And I think apologizing, maybe not even necessarily apologizing, but connecting to a person on that level. A lot of GitHub repositories, you post something and someone will come back with, oh, you followed that wrong, or you didn't check right, or this, or it's like, hang on a second, let's humanize it. And we're all busy, right? But the reason, and I literally said this yesterday, you're making Pachli for you. You saw a need, you wanted to make something, but it is there to be used by other humans. It is for humans. It is not just some code to go out in the wind, and you want to make it as human friendly as possible, right?
Yeah. And I think to your point there as well, I think a thing that I cannot stress highly enough, and I see this as a failure mode, especially in like, I think more, I was going to say junior developers, and I do mean that just like developers who have less experience,
right,
of like writing software and thinking about software, is you are not your code, right? If somebody says like something nasty about Pachli, right, or anything else I've written,
yeah,
that's not a comment about me.
Yeah.
Right. I just like, I'm not going to get.
Yeah, you don't have to internalize it
by that. You see this in probably similar things where I would describe it as people making their choice of software or their choice of Linux distribution or whatever, like part of their personality. And it's kind of like, don't do that. Like there's better things you could choose to make part of your personality. And it's like, and it just leads to this sort of needless fighting over which distro are you using, or which are you using, Mastodon or Misskey or GoToControl.
We try to get to the source of the problem as quickly as possible without humanizing it, right? And it goes both ways too. Like if someone does bring a post like that, and then developers like, okay, well, what are you using? Don't get offended by it. That's also that's not a youth. I've been trying to post as much as possible on PyFed, as I've told people, is to try and build up that amount of knowledge. Like, yes, I could go Google it. That's not the point. We're in the Fediverse. Let's build the Fediverse. And I asked a question, and someone really literally responded to me, that's a stupid effing question. And I responded back to them, Okay, I understand. Just to let you know, it's really rude to say it's a stupid effing question. So why don't you give me some constructive criticism instead? Like,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, for sure. And I think that's probably one of the biggest differences I feel like I've seen between I'd say like corporate software development and open source software development, where on the corporate side, feedback on like sort of design documents or like PR review and things like that tends to be less, in my experience, less personalized.
sterile. I call it sterile. I have been
Um,
I have been informed numerous times by my coworkers that when I send an email, it comes across like I'm talking to a person.
right.
And I was like, what the hell? I am talking to a person. I don't know what you mean. And they're like, you need to make it more business like. And I'm like, I'm not a business.
Right. Yeah.
I'm a
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, this is the thing as well. It's like everybody's got different preferred communication modes, like trying to figure out what
Yeah.
it is and having them mesh is like a whole other topic. And
Right. Yeah.
we make that even more difficult for ourselves when so much of this communication right now is mediated between small text boxes of 500 characters or whatever. Like, there's very little room for nuance there as well, or even just an assumption of good faith, right, around a lot of these topics. And again, there are obviously instances where you can safely assume that the other person is not operating in good faith, and you see this with like online trolling and harassment and stuff like that. So I'm not talking about those sorts of situations, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's, I don't know, like sometimes it almost feels like people become, for some of these projects, quite sort of quick to take offense for feedback about, say, like a piece of code, and again, like assuming that it is about them and not the code. And this is something that, and again, like to be clear, we're all human, absolutely. Like sometimes somebody will say something about something I've written or whatever, and I'll look at that, and you get that brief moment of, or hopefully brief moment of, what did they just say? Right? I like start typing some furious response, and then you do have to, hopefully, and again, only human, I'm sure I've failed at this multiple times, but try and take that step back and just go, wait a second, like, who is going to be helped by this? Right? Absolute best case is like, write it out and then delete it. Like, get it off your chest and then go, all right.
Right.
Somebody's got to be the bigger person here, right? Or even not just the bigger person, just like keep this back onto something more constructive.
I mean, what I've gotten to is I just let it sit, whatever it is. If there's like an email or a response or something, just let it sit for a day. It's not going to disappear. A person, if they expect immediate turnaround, sorry, you got to wait. I took that as you were a dick. But normally when you come back to it, a lot of times it is not as offensive as you originally realized, right? You might have been in a bad mindset, or the way that you added a tone to text, which text has no tone, which makes this so difficult. You cannot convey like sarcasm, right? And sometimes we imply sarcasm ourselves to text that shouldn't exist. And just let it sit, give yourself a day or two, come back, try to look at it with a clear eye. And then if it's still offensive, then take action. But yeah, or like you said, write up an email, take your time writing it, response, and then just delete it. Throw it away because...
Well, like, find other ways to communicate, like whether it's instant messaging, pick up the phone if you can, like say, we should have a video call about this, like, because we're clearly like talking past each other or whatever. So let's figure that out. And yeah, that's probably more difficult in a lot of the open source space maybe than it is in the commercial space. But like, it is what it is. People are people. You need to obviously the whole, like, a common failure mode, though, is still, I will try and solve these social issues with technology.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not going to work.
I mean, that's literally what, and I've told people, not to get political, but the current state in the United States, where we have a lot of Silicon Valley people think that they can just code their way out of any issue.
Right. Yeah.
And it's not, guys, it's not, nothing I could do about it now, but you can't. I'm sorry. I don't care how brilliant you are. You cannot end world hunger with 3 lines of AI generated code.
Right.
It's not going to work. But before we move on, I wanted to talk to you about the Pachli logo, because you and I talked about this. I love the Pachli logo. I don't think you should change it. And actually, the Pachli logo you created, I'm trying to create a logo for my nonprofit, BT Free, and I took inspiration from your logo.
Oh, right.
In order to, like, I hired a designer. No, yeah, that's how much I really like it, because, so if, just to let folks know, on the audio version, you should go look at it, in my opinion. It is a square blue background with a orange P, but the P is broken up into 3 sections. And because you explained this to me, let me know if I've gotten it right, is the left side of the P is like the elephant's trunk, and then there's essentially a rectangle, which is like its face, and then the actual curved part of the P is like the ear.
Yep.
And I think that meant, I love clean, minimalism. And once you see it like that, it makes perfect sense. And I can't unsee it now. And I love it. And I think it's great.
I mean, I feel like I got profoundly lucky with that. I've spent probably a week to 10 days kicking around like sort of different ideas for the project when I first started. Like I had a Obsidian Markdown document of like a bunch of different options. Then you get that sort of whole process of, okay, which ones are other people's trademarks or are rude words in different languages or would be difficult to spell or whatever. Yeah. And then I sort of knocked it down to like sort of 2 or 3. And then I was thinking around.
I think you referenced, when we originally talked to, the classic Puckman issue, right?
Right.
Or Pac-Man versus Puckman, and yeah. And you're trying to stay away from something like that. You're not going to do everything. But this is great.
Yeah. And then this was right around the time, I think, or maybe a little bit after, that Twitter had this whole rebranding to X, right? And it's the mathematical X symbol. And I was looking at other characters in the same character set and then saw the P. And then almost immediately then saw like, oh, what trunk and ears. Oh, okay. Actually, this works. I'm sure like some part of the back of my brain is going, like, if Musk ever sees this and decides to sue, that's probably some useful publicity. That would be good. That would. I've got.
That's how I've been looking at this kind of stuff too. When I've started a business, they're like, "Well, who are your competitors?" And I was like, "Google, Facebook, X," and they're like, "Oh," and they're like, "You're not worried?" I was like, "If they sue me, then what's the worst that they can do? I can be totally destitute." But hey, it gets the word of the Fediverse out, right? And that's a positive for everyone.
I mean, I wasn't thinking about that. I was just thinking that would be so funny if that actually happened. And it's like, in Switzerland, one of the things you have here is legal insurance. I have legal insurance. Yeah. So I'm thinking like, I'm not taking any risk. And also, as is clear, I have no graphic design skills whatsoever. So I need something, we'll change this. But then once I saw the similarity to the elephant's head or whatever, I sort of latched onto that and went, oh, actually, this does kind of work. And then there's a bit in the in the about page on the website as well. So there's this other thing about it, which is in that sort of same stylized alphabet that mathematicians would use, the Q with a sort of the hollow rims of it kind of would denote the set of rational numbers. And so P is next to Q in the alphabet. And so this idea of using something that is close to rational as a symbol for something like social media sort of struck me as, okay, that's like a little interesting play on.
No, I mean,
wordplay.
This either either you're an absolute brilliant genius that came up with this, because so for those that don't know, packli, which I don't think we talked about, but packli, the idea comes from pachyderm,
Yep.
which is an elephant, which is mastodon, their symbol. So then you have the P, which looks exactly like an elephant once you see it. And like, I originally thought that maybe you came up with the logo first and then came up with Pachli after that, because like that's how well it fits together. And it in my opinion, it's a stroke of genius. I am also not a designer, but I know what I like, and I really like that.
It's one of those like pure like lightning struck. I could have like not come up with that and spent like another week or more trying to come up with ideas, like trying to convince friends of mine who are like sort of graphic designers or work in marketing to come up with ideas. But I just got lucky. And then the LI on the end is just a nod to the fact that I'm in Switzerland, and in Swiss German, the LI suffix on a word just makes it the sort of the diminutive version of the word, so like little something.
Okay.
So the local little mountain closer to it is the Ut-Li-Berg, or like a little piece of bread, like a bun or something, would be Brot-Li in Swiss German, and so that sort of came from that as well. It's like, and it's short and it's memorable. It turns out a number of people don't quite know how to pronounce it, but that's fine as long as they can find it, use it.
The first time that I saw it, I thought it was Pachli.
Yep.
But once you said it's like pachyderm, it makes perfect sense. But pronunciations, as I've told people before, pronunciations are, there's an intent, GIF versus GIF, right? But then there's a societal acceptance to how it is. And neither one, in my opinion, is right or wrong. It's GIF, not GIF. But society is allowed to decide how to pronounce things. You are, originally from the UK. You speak specific words, very specific ways that, to me has an accent, whereas to you, I have the accent. Mm-hmm. And one's not right or wrong. So let's also never get on anyone about you're pronouncing it wrong. No, because 9 times out of 10, when someone pronounces a word wrong, it's because they read it and they've never heard it. And let's cherish and pat each other on the back for reading, because anymore we don't even do that.
Yeah, no, for sure. There are more important things to argue about. Right. Or discuss in this stuff. But yeah, there was one other thing from it, and I've remembered what it was, which would be coming back to that sort of the topic of harassment and things that was happening back last year.
Yes.
And I think this is one of those things again where I feel like there's more space in the Fediverse ecosystem to innovate around some of this stuff, I think. So I remember looking at a lot of those discussions that were going on and people saying, well, if these particular features existed, then they would protect us from harassment, and various people saying, well, but all of that has to be built into the server. And I remember looking at those and going, well, I don't think that's true. And so over a number of releases, Pachli now has support for allowing you to filter content from your timeline, your notifications, your direct messages from accounts that you don't follow, or from accounts that are younger than 30 days, I think I said it to. And that works. Mastodon, the server, introduced similar functionality, but by doing that client side on Pachli, that works across any server that you're using, whether it's Mastodon or GoToSocial or Pleroma or Acoma or whatever. And that can get deployed, and we can sort of innovate in that space, like sort of a little bit easier, I think. And this is one of the things I think is missing is the life of a client developer would be easier if the server developers were thinking more about what's the information that we can provide to the client as efficiently as possible, and then they can do some of the smarter stuff on the front end for.
Well, we're never going to completely prevent harassment. It's going to happen one way or another, unfortunately. And we can try again and code our way out of it and code every single edge case, but then you're going to trample on people's right to have conversations, in my opinion. There's been times where I've watched friends on Twitch and, you know, they say something and they're joking about themselves, and I, you know, make a joke about something similar, and, you know, the mod flags me, the auto mod, the code flags me, and they're like, I don't know why that flagged you. And I was like, because, you know, I said CUNT or something like that.
Right.
And it's like, but they're from Australia. That's like calling someone a buddy or a friend. And again, there's too many societal variables for that. And I actually think I agree with you, where the server side should give the clients the tools so that the client can expose it to the end person. Now, I have seen where someone was kind of harassing a person, and then they're like, well, that guy's a troll. He deserves to be harassed. I was like, okay, so first off, they're not a troll. I'm pretty sure that they have some issues, let's say it nicely, and you're just being a jerk, and you shouldn't be the arbiter of dishing out punishment. Mm-hmm. And I kind of warned the guy, like, hey, you're on your own instance. If you don't play nice with people, they're going to start blocking you. And he didn't play nice with people, so I reported him. But I'm hopeful something like that can help. I know that PyFed kind of has like a little warning on like a social metric, their social rating or something like that. And I thought I saw Mastodon had started rolling out something similar, but maybe that just might have been the client I was looking at. And that's well and good, but that doesn't stop a bad actor, whoever it is, from completely destroying your social rating. And now, you know, you become a leper, essentially. No one wants to interact with you.
I think this is one of the challenges of the federated model. And to be very clear, like, I have no idea what the solutions to some of these issues would look like. But you do have the situation where somebody might be sort of posting something that is within bounds of the rules of the instance that they're on, but is out of bounds of the rules of an instance of somebody that sees it. I don't think we have good answers for how to deal with that yet, because, for example, when you report something that you've seen, you get to see the rules of your instance, not the rules of the instance that that somebody is coming from. And yeah, it's difficult to manage when you have different servers, different islands, if you want to refer to them like that, with sort of
different societal expectations,
slightly different rules. Right, exactly. And yeah, as people like sort of code switch between different interactions that they're having with different groups of people, then that is going to it's difficult, as your Twitch example demonstrates. It's difficult for like purely automated systems to take to that.
And that's there was some awesome like glasses that were AR, and that allowed was it a Chinese speaker and I think a German speaker to talk to each other, and they were speaking in their native language and it was translating. And again, my whole thought the entire time is, yeah, that's cool, but like you when I worked for Red Hat, we were not allowed to take cases from Japan, not because they couldn't speak English or, you know, it was because they have very specific social constructs when it comes to business. And it was very easy to, you know, not apply those. And something, again, like the whole Silicon Valley can answer all of our questions, is you can't code for every single edge case.
Yep.
And that's going to be weird. You know, international wars started because the glasses said you said one thing and really you meant another. And I don't see human aspect being taken out of those kinds of things. And really that's where a lot of this lies. Beha, I don't know if you know Beha, Lemmy instance, they started posting whenever someone posts from BHA pops up and says, hey, we know Lemmy instances have these terms of conduct, but be aware that BHA folks are used to a little bit more compassion and empathy. So please be cautious on what you say. And it's like, that's great and all, but if someone's going to poke a bear, they're going to poke it even harder now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yes. I mean, going back to your sort of very original question about challenges for the Fediverse, I feel like how we do moderation and how moderation activities are treated and how moderators are managed and trained is a huge part of that. So many servers, I think, rely purely on volunteer moderators, which just like feels very wrong in terms of the types of because it's like if there is a function that should be paid for, I feel like good moderation is it. There's no guarantee about like any sort of level of training that they might receive, and I think even people can legitimately have very different approaches to what they think the role of moderators on a server is. So I saw something the other day which gave me pause for thought, and I haven't quite finished thinking through this, so this might be a little bit incoherent. But the comment that struck me was somebody saying that it was the responsibility of the moderators on the server to be a steward of the community on that server. And this was sort of related to somebody else that I'd seen talk about how moderators had the power on the server. And I remember sort of reading that and scratching my head slightly and thinking, well, that feels almost exactly backwards. It's like the community should, as far as practical, be the stewards of the community on that server. Moderators, and like there, we probably split that out into at least two roles, one of which is dealing with reports of material that is illegal or harassing or spam, and then what would then hopefully be much less of a concern, which is like sort of moderation within an ongoing conversation, assuming again like it's staying within the bounds of the norms on that server, or even the bounds of the norms within those two users. This, I think, is something again that comes up. We talked about earlier a little bit about people choosing the server that they're going to be on and looking at that as like a technical decision, or like, oh, how many other users are on there or whatever. And this is not an idea original to me, but I forget who to credit it to, so apologies for that. But I saw somebody refer to it as, no, when you choose a server, you're choosing the moderation culture that you want to be in, because I think a lot of the time that's the thing that might distinguish server A and server B. Now, you absolutely have servers that are like sort of single focus. Like made the sort of the Fediverse news recently, like something like Fosterdon, for example.
But you don't stay within those specific walls. Like, you're going to go out. So I think that moderation is probably, I've never thought that about either. It's interesting.
But yeah, this idea that the moderator should only have the power that the community has devolved to them.
Right.
And the community on the server, if the server is small enough to feel like a community.
That's
more of that. But I am like not a social scientist. These are at best very half-baked ideas.
It is a difficult thing, right? Because essentially we're setting ourselves up as dictators of our own instance. You want to try to make it as democratic as possible, which slows everything down. So I've thought about that too with PeerTube. Like, if I open up a PeerTube to numerous folks, I'm looking at a moderated instance most likely, but there's still going to be times where, because one of my friends he loves watching YouTubers that do guns. They do gun tubers, and it is very engineering wise. It's very mechanical. It's how this works, that works, but then they also shoot the guns. And there's some people that are just like, no, absolutely not. And you want to give everyone a say, but how do you do that? There's actually, I'm almost positive that there's a Canadian co-op Mastodon server that basically said if you're joining, you are a mod and everyone is a mod, but you do not get ultimate defining power. It is more of, hey, I see a problem and you bring it to all of us and we go as a collective, which again, I like, but, and that's anything that's not illegal, right? If someone posting something that's blatantly illegal, then, act, but it's interesting. It's definitely, it's funny to think that the code part at this point is easy.
I was about to say it always is. I think it's not necessarily always is, but it's generally always easier.
Yeah.
Than the social side of things. And again, I cannot stress enough. I know very little about relevant research in this space. I'm quite certain other people who know a lot more about this than I do have done work on this. And actually, so if anybody is watching this, either sort of now in the future and knows of any of this, do drop a link, because I think that would be
that'd be great,
quite useful to again not recapitulate mistakes that other services in this sort of space might have made in the past, I think.
Excellent. All right, so now for the real reason I asked Nik here is to give him an opportunity to win a prize of a lifetime. Our prize today is infinite Monopoly money to use on all of the very useful stuff that big tech is pushing out. I'm looking at you, AI, at the moment. We see you, AI, how useful you are. We thought about unlimited credits to use on GitHub's Copilot, but I figured you like your sanity and want to continue to tell AI to refactor its code 100 times. I don't know if you've recently seen the...
I saw that.
That was brilliant. Well, that was so efficient.
The part, like, at the point in sort of 2018, after Google had sort of quite got to that point, so I didn't get to experience stuff like that, but I can absolutely imagine the environment in which something like that would happen, and I can imagine the engineers just doing that through gritted teeth.
It was that's great. So, are you ready for the quiz, Nik?
Yes.
All right. Favorite movie and why is it Spaceballs?
See, I don't know that you can just have like a single favorite movie, right? As a child of the 80s, like I said, child of the 80s. I mean, Spaceballs is close. Like Mel Brooks is great, but it's either the original Ghostbusters, like if we're talking about that era, or maybe like sort of Back to the Future.
Back to the Future is so good. And sorry, I have to say this. Like, I hate time travel movies. I hate time travel movies that solve a problem. And everyone is like, they immediately say, well, what about Back to the Future? To which I respond, Back to the Future is not a time travel movie. The first and the third one are not. The second one absolutely is. The first and the third one use time travel to start the movie. It starts the adventure. It starts the story. It is not the adventure. The second one, in my opinion, is by far the worst because of that. But that's a great one too. All of those are good.
But even then, it's like the idea of like sort of going back and saying, okay, right, well, a movie from like probably 40 years old is still my sort of favorite movie. Like, kind of feels wrong. One of the things that I started doing when COVID first hit with friends was we would get together virtually and have a sort of Wednesday evening movie night. And so we would all like in turns to pick a movie and then watch it and talk about it afterwards. And we've continued that tradition ever since. And the range of movies that we've seen through that, and like things that I would never normally choose. So even yesterday, I forget the name now, A Taste of Something, and I forget what the something is. It's like right into my wheelhouse, because probably the first 20 minutes of it is set in a sort of French in this kitchen of a French manor house, where like two people who obviously acting like they know a great deal about food, but like very carefully preparing a meal. And like people talk about food porn or whatever, but it's kind of what that is. And you look at that and you just go, all right, this is two people who are like very, very good at their job, doing something very simple. And actually, I think that's what I look for in a movie. Like when it looks like everybody was at the top of their game when they made it.
That's fair.
And they enjoy doing it.
Okay. Next question is Z or Z?
Oh,
I figured that'd be an easy one.
I was probably going to say Z, I think. And I was now trying to think about like pronouncing different words. And then as I say that, I was about to say pronouncing different words with a Z in them. So now I realize actually it's Z, because that was what I went to when I wasn't thinking.
Well, you mentioned the ZX Spectrum earlier, so.
Yeah, Z. Yeah, you're right. I would never say GX Spectrum. Yeah, no, you're quite right.
All right. Next question is Pachyderm, Pi, or Print Working Directory?
Pi.
Pi, what kind?
And
the mathematical kind is completely relevant as well. If you, this is whatever you want.
I'm trying to think what I made recently. I made a Moroccan. I made recently. I'm probably going to mispronounce this now. It's called Bestia, I think. And the filling is a sort of mix of chicken and almonds and raisins and assorted other bits and pieces. And then the pie dough is a sort of phyllo pastry. So it's layers and layers of phyllo pastry, and you put the filling and then you wrap the top all over. So you end up with these like phyllo parcels of chicken pie, and it's delicious.
It sounds like a pot pie.
It's kind of, I think, probably like the Moroccan equivalent to a pot pie. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. That sounds really good.
So that just because I made that recently.
All right. Next question is, what does an alternative universe Nik do?
Oh, good Lord. That's really hard because I've thought about this in the past, like in conversations with friends and talking about what they do, I think. And one of the things that I'm sort of continually thankful for is, with very few exceptions, I've always enjoyed programming and what I do, and is incredibly lucky to be able to sort of turn it into a career. And there are other things that I enjoy doing for different amounts of time, but there's nothing that sort of scratches that itch of like creative coding and getting something out in that way. So
okay.
That's really hard. I honestly don't know.
Well, so I have a magic phone here. It's a interdimensional phone, and I called out to a random universe, and I spoke to another Nik, and oddly enough, he told me that he is an elephant whisperer, but that elephants really only have two things to talk about, and that's peanuts and how much they hate mice. So I'm not sure I really believe him. At least you guys have that in common.
Yeah, I guess it's. I mean, I'm leaning towards something food-based. Yes. I think about the
follow.
Idea of like
we didn't get on that, but follow Nik, because Nik posts some amazing looking food. I saw it, and I'm like, I'm going to dinner.
I think about the idea of like sort of being a professional chef or something like that, and I just look at the lifestyle that has, right, and the number of hours and the stress.
But all that food you get to eat,
and the way that people get the way that people get treated and things like that, and it just it doesn't appeal. Like the activity of cooking for people that you care about, like absolutely. Have you ever seen the film Chef?
No.
It's definitely worth seeing. So Jon Favreau gets to call in a bunch of his Hollywood superstar mates to come and cameo in this little indie film that he's doing. So it has like Scarlett Johansson and Dustin Hoffman in it, for example. And like there's a scene in there where he is just cooking this like very simple pasta dish for Scarlett Johansson.
Okay.
And
I love Jon Favreau. That dude has such an amazing sense of humor about himself. Like he's one of those guys, it seems that he's like, okay, I've made it. I'm just going to have fun with it. And you can tell because most people know him from directing. You know, he's directed some of the Marvel movies.
Mm-hmm.
And he just seems to have a lot of fun with it. And that looks good. Yeah, I'm going to have to check that out. Okay.
Yeah, that's worth doing. But yeah, no, I feel like doing all of that stuff professionally would probably suck a lot of the joy.
Oh, they're militaristic. It's insane.
When I've been coding professionally, it's never sucked the joy out of doing it. Like other parts of the job might have done, but the actual
have you ever tried talking to an elephant though? You might have a knack for it.
Elephant whisperer.
Yeah, elephant whisperer.
Next time I'm in Bali, I might give that a try.
There you go. All right. Next question is spring, summer, fall, or winter?
That's hard in Switzerland.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh well, is it like always winter there? Or?
No, it's because you've got proper seasons, and you have. And it feels like a proper progression through the year, as there are like different cultural things happening and different things to look forward to through the year as well. If I'm up a mountain, then absolutely the winter.
Yeah.
And then if I'm by the lake, it's the summer.
Okay, that's fair. All right.
Top two.
And then, as usual, the last question will be sent to Nik telepathically. I will send you the question. I'll let you know when it's there. Obviously, you'll know because we're telepathic, but for audio listeners, I do that favor for you. Nik, are you ready?
Okay.
All right. Okay, there's the question. I sent it to you telepathically, which you know because you got.
So let me think about that. I feel like, yes, you should, but only if you feel like it's going to leave you with a good story afterwards.
All right, yeah. I like that. All right, cool. So congratulations. You got every answer, either correct or incorrect. Good job. Our community member Brooks was riding the Monopoly dog because let's be honest, that's the only good Monopoly piece. He was riding the Monopoly dog to come and give you your prize, but unfortunately he landed on community chest and now he has to go directly to jail. He does not pass go. He does not collect $200. So your prize was confiscated. I apologize. And once Brooks gets out of Monopoly prison, we'll make sure to punish him again for losing your massively valuable prize.
I'm pretty certain that's probably for the best, as I don't know I have enough space to store an infinite number of Monopoly bills. That was the problem that immediately popped into my head. So,
problem solving, right? Yeah. So, and that's all the time we have for today on Fireside Fedi. It was an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Nik. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for all you're doing, giving your experience back to the Fediverse, coding Pachli, making the web more free, helped us get our privacy back, and for all of the delicious looking pictures. Like, I don't know which one I said, and had a pie and something else, and I was just like, I'm so hungry now. It looks delicious. Right. Thank you, sir.
This has been a lot of fun, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to everyone on the Fediverse as well. You're all the reason that this world is so unique and wonderful. While Nik and others are helping build out a better web, it's not worth anything without all of you. Please take care of yourselves. Go easy on yourselves during the difficult times. Remember, you're only human. As far as I'm aware, you might not be, but I know I am. And you all deserve love. And I can't do this alone. Nik can't do this alone, but together we can do anything. And have a wonderful day. We'll catch you next time. Bye.